Hi guys, in this video I'm going to talk about the 3 reasons that hearing aid companies private label their hearing aids and why they may or may not be right for you. Coming up. Cliff Olson, Doctor of Audiology and founder of Applied Hearing Solutions, and on this channel I cover a bunch of cool hearing related stuff, so if you're into that, consider hitting the subscribe button. When you think of hearing aids, 6 major brands should come to mind: Phonak, Resound, Oticon, Starkey, Signia, and Widex. No matter what clinic you go to, there's a high probability that you'll be fit with one of these major manufacturers' hearing aids. Now, some of you out there who are more familiar with hearing aids might be used to seeing brands like Kirkland or Beltone or AGX. Now, if you recognize the brand Resound, you may or may not recognize the brand Beltone, but Beltone is Resound. They're just branded a different name. And when I say that they're rebranded, that is it. They are literally identical hearing aids that you would get as if you purchased them from one of those 6 major manufacturers with their brand name on it. Now, why would they make private label hearing aids, you might ask? Well, that's a good question. There are 3 reasons. Reason number 1, brand recognition. For years, hearing aid manufacturers have been building up their brands to become as recognizable as they are today. One problem with this is that it only brands the technology from that particular manufacturer. And when you go into hearing aid dispensing clinics, if they want to sell multiple brands of hearing aids, it can become very confusing for a patient. Now, private labeling these hearing aids allows that one hearing aid clinic to sell multiple lines of hearing aids, but under one name, thus making it less confusing for a patient. One of the companies that I mentioned earlier, Beltone, actually does this to establish their own brand recognition. They have their Beltone hearing aid clinics and they have their Beltone brand hearing aids. When you buy a Beltone hearing aid, you are essentially buying a Resound hearing aid. I think this is one of the positives of private labeling hearing aids, because you can essentially take the onus away from the hearing device or the widget and have it be more focused on the service that you provide, which is arguably, maybe not even arguably, more important than the hearing aid itself. Alright, reason number 2 is price comparison. Since most hearing aid dispensing clinics sell the same exact hearing aids, it's very easy for a consumer or someone like you to take a recommendation from one of those clinics and take it over to a different clinic and compare it based on price. Private labeling prevents this kind of direct comparison. Now, you could technically take a private labeled hearing aid from one clinic and compare it to a name brand hearing aid from another clinic if you know what you're looking for, but private labeling makes that much more complicated. Personally, I think that private labeling hearing aids for the purpose of preventing price comparison is a bad thing. I believe complete transparency is the best way to run a business, and I don't like anything that prevents me from being able to do due diligence as a consumer myself. That being said, I don't like when someone uses price comparison as a reason to pick one clinic over another clinic. The hearing aid itself is such a small component of success with hearing treatment that if you do price comparison on the device alone, you could be missing factors like the service and the quality of care that you'll get from one clinic versus another clinic. The majority of success has to do with the hearing care provider that you see and their willingness to use best practices. So just make sure that you keep that in mind before you make a decision on where to go based on price alone. And reason number 3, and my personal pet peeve, is it prevents you from going anywhere else for your care. If you do happen to purchase a hearing aid from a clinic that's private labeled, you've essentially just signed on to go to that clinic until it's time for you to get a new hearing aid. Private label hearing aids are often locked, and what I mean by locked is when you get fit with that hearing aid with the software of the clinic that you bought it at, that hearing aid can't be taken to another clinic and reprogrammed or adjusted at all because the programming inside of it is locked. Now, if your hearing care provider is doing a good job, they'll be making adjustments pretty often. And if that's the case, you can't go to a new provider even if you move to a different state because they're not going to have access to the software. Now, I have a patient who just moved to Arizona from Missouri and has an AGX branded hearing aid that was made by Resound. Now, I work with Resound and I love working with Resound. The problem is that he needs adjustments to be made on that hearing aid, and I can't make them because I don't have access to the software. So this patient's options are to buy new hearing aids, and his hearing aids are only a year old, or to drive an hour into town into a provider that works with AGX. Another negative is that if he purchased that hearing aid under a bundled model of care, it included all the services with the cost of the hearing aid. So even though he's already paid for service, he has to repay when he comes to me or goes to another clinic because that money was kept by the clinic that sold him the hearing aid. If you want to know more about bundling versus unbundling, I will list a video that I made in the description below. From an industry perspective, private labeling hearing aids makes sense. From a consumer's perspective, not so much. Personally, even though I'm in the industry, I'm not a fan of private labeling hearing aids. I believe it restricts access to hearing care, and I believe that it decreases transparency. The one case that I do recommend going with a private label hearing aid is if you found an excellent hearing care provider, whether it be an audiologist or a hearing instrument specialist. If you find an excellent provider, I don't care if they sell you a hearing aid that is not made by one of the major 6 manufacturers, you go to that provider, because you will have much more success with a great provider but not so good of a hearing aid than you will with a great hearing aid and a horrible provider. Just know that if you go with a private label hearing aid, you're essentially marrying that clinic that you bought it from. Now, if that hearing care provider ends up leaving, quitting, getting fired, getting hit by a bus, you're still stuck with that clinic even if they bring in a provider that you don't particularly like. That's it for today's video. If you like the information, give it a thumbs up and feel free to hit the subscribe button. I'll see you next time.